Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is Monday, June 15th, 2020, and today I'm still in Colorado. If you haven't noticed, I've been here for a couple of weeks and enjoying the beauty of the area. And today I am up on Castle Pines. Castle Pines sits up kind of on a mountainous area, and then behind me there's like a golf course down below here. I don't know, 500, 700 feet down, and then across over here is where the Rocky Mountains are at, and actually Pikes Peak, you can barely make out Pikes Peak right there. And Pikes Peak is about, I think, 45 miles away, something like that. So it's quite amazing to watch and see just how far away that you can see from here. In fact, the mountains behind me are probably 20 miles behind me, something like that. And last night I was here for the sunset, and it was beautiful. A lot of the people come out here as a regular basis, and it's really cool when you see about, I don't know, 400 people that come out here to watch the sunset, every night. A lot of them sit on their cars, a lot of them go for walks and have dinner, and it's just a neat, beautiful place to come. So I thoroughly am enjoying myself here in the area, because I am an outdoorsman at heart. I love to go on adventures. I love to go places I've never been before, and it's just a blessing. In fact, this last weekend, Saturday, I always kind of talk about what happened, the day before or the weekend before with my broadcast. And so on Saturday, a local pastor from Colorado Springs named Jim took me on a kayaking trip to a lake that was very close to Pikes Peak, and it was just gorgeous, just beautiful. He said it was the most packed he'd ever seen it, but the people that were on the lake, I mean, you could have fit another, I don't know, at least 5,000 probably people there, because it's a big lake. And what was cool about it was we went kayaking, and I'm used to kayaking with an oar, whatever dual-sided paddle. And he had learned that in his Hobies that you could put these flippers down below, and you could use your feet like a bike and then pedal, and then it would actually move the flippers to propel you forward. And then he had a rudder that you could control with your hand. And so here we are going really fast, faster than typical, across the lake, and you can guide and direct it wherever you want to go. So it was the coolest thing ever. Got to have lunch at a private cove that they had there, and then came back, and it was just awesome. I mean, I love to go kayaking. Had so much fun. It was on a place called Rampart Reservoir, and you have to go through a bunch of bumpy roads to get there. So it's off in the middle of nowhere, but it is the locals here that visit there. It's a beautiful lake, just pure and spotless, very clean. And then what was really amazing is we come back to his place, and I had noticed in his garage that he had a Tesla. And I have never, ever ridden in a Tesla. I've seen some of the videos a couple of years ago. Somebody told me about how you can go like 0 to 60 in like 3.3 seconds. It's like it's the fastest car out there. It's all electric. And I've seen the videos where these people were riding with people in the Teslas, and they showed their reaction, because it is such a rush to go from 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. And so I was like, hey, do you think maybe I could ride in this? And he's like, ride in it? You can drive it. And I'm like, no way, I can drive it? I'm like, I don't want to wreck it. He's like, oh, you won't wreck it, you can drive it. And I'm like, okay, oh my gosh. And so the first thing we did is we drove it to a church parking lot, and he showed me how he could drive the car from his phone. We both get out of the car, and he starts driving the car on his phone, and it goes like, I don't know, 200 feet away from us. And then he has it back up and then pull up to come get us. And I'm like, what? You can drive the car with your phone? I'm like, that is the coolest thing ever. And so I'm like, okay, everything in me, being a kid at heart, wants to drive, from 0 to 60 or maybe a little more just to see what it feels like. And so we came to this one area where he said, this is where we can do it at. And the light was red and I had to do a U-turn. So I do the U-turn, and as I'm driving, approaching some other stoplights, they're red at first. And I'm like, oh man. Well, then they turn green. So I punch it and it goes up to 83 in like a couple of seconds. And I'm like, what? I'm like, this is so cool. So it was the coolest thing I've ever experienced. I mean, it's even better than the roller coasters that I've been on, because you're in a car and it kind of made me sense about what it's like to be maybe in heaven and translate how you can get from point A to point B like really fast. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So I'm going to forever refer to him as Pastor Tesla because it was so cool. And I'm like, do they have an SUV that's a Tesla? Because, if I were to get one of these things, oh my gosh, I'd probably have to get an SUV with my books. He's like, yes, they have one. They have a SUV. I'm like, you're kidding. And then he said they've got a truck that they're coming out with that's going to be coming out in 2021 that's stainless steel, that's like supposedly you can't shoot a gun through it. And then they're coming out with a semi. And I'm like, a semi Tesla? This is incredible. So anyway, if you want to check out the video, you can watch it on my personal profile on Facebook, Nelson Schuman, and you can see what my reaction is. It's pretty, it's amazing. It really was cool. I'll have to admit that. So then yesterday, I decided to go up to Estes Park, which is northwest of Denver, and do some hiking there. And when I got to Estes Park, it's just beautiful. It's up about, what is it? 7,000 some feet. They have a lake called Lake Estes. And as I'm searching as to where to go hiking and stuff, I discovered that they have Rocky Mountain National Park. So I'm thinking, what a great time. I can go to Rocky Mountain National Park. So I get in line to go to Rocky Mountain National Park, and then there's some park rangers there that are talking to people. I'm thinking, oh, that's nice of them. So when they come up, and I pull up, and I talk to my park ranger, he says these words to me that I've never heard before. So, do you have a reservation? I'm like, reservation? What? To go to a national park? I'm like, no. He's like, well, then I'm sorry, sir, but you can't go today then. I'm like, what? Yeah, yes, we're sold out. And I'm like, you're sold out? How can you be sold out from going to a national park? National parks are quite large. I don't think you're going to have enough cars to fill up the national park. So I didn't strive with him, but I was thinking, how ridiculous is life becoming? So I ended up having to pull over, and I'm thinking, okay, where am I going to go now to go hiking? And I ended up finding a lake called Lily Lake. And drove up to that. Beautiful. It's probably up, 8,000 feet maybe. And as I pull into park, again, there's another park ranger, 2 of them, in fact, 2 ladies. And I'm like thinking, why are these park rangers here? And I pull up and they wave me down. Sir, do you have a reservation? And I'm like, are you kidding me? A reservation to walk around this lake? Are you kidding me? And they're like, sorry, but you can't. I'm like, seriously? So then I pull out of there and I'm like, Lord, what's a guy to do that wants to go hiking? And I saw a bunch of cars that were parked on the side of the road. So I decided, okay, I'll park at the side of the road. And then I noticed some people walking on a path. So I went down to the path, I start walking, and before you know it, there's the lake. I'm like, and there's like only, 10 people walking around this lake. It could probably hold 1,000 people. And then it goes back to another area where you can see the snow-topped mountains. It's just gorgeous and beautiful. So I got a little bit of hiking in there, but it's sad to me that now the virus people are controlling the national park system. And I'm like, this is so sad. I'm like, Lord, will you please hurry up and end this craziness, because it's really not cool to try and do stuff like this. It's like, and then it's weird to see people out walking in the park. These, again, this is wide open space here, and I'll see probably 20% of the people wearing masks, and I'm like, what? You're wearing mask and you're riding a bike. You're wearing mask and you're walking down a mountain. I'm like, that is got to be much harder because the oxygen level is not as good up at the higher levels than it would be to not have the mask. And I'm like, what are you going to do? Get the virus from a tree or a bison or a deer or a bear? I don't think so. So let's get rid of this fear and let's do it quickly because it's ridiculous what's happening. Alrighty. Yeah, and then last night I came here and I watched the sunset and it was beautiful. Just gorgeous and very peaceful. Like oftentimes you'll have a bunch of wind up here because we're up on top. I don't know how high up we are. We're probably up at least 6,000 feet here at Castle Pines. So, but it was not windy at all. So it was beautiful. Also, my assistant Tina is actually taking a vacation this week. First time in a long time. Well deserved. So, yay, Tina. Hopefully you're enjoying yourself, and I'm going to try not to bug you on your vacation. So the YouTube videos that she converts my Facebook Lives to, I'm not sure if I'll have time to do them, so you may have to wait until next week till she gets back to convert them over to YouTube. So just FYI. And then also June the 27th, so in 12 days, I'll be ministering at the Wild Branch Ministry in Colorado Springs. They meet at Free Chapel Church in Colorado Springs. It's going to be an awesome time of breakthrough in people's lives, freedom from their past wounds, having Jesus come to heal, and commanding the enemy to go so that we can truly walk in the freedom that Christ has for us. So it's going to be an awesome time. Again, June 27th, here in Colorado Springs. In fact, I've been connecting with a lot of the local people here and then connecting them so that they can come together and have people who are pushing in for the deeper things in the Spirit. You know, the Holy Spirit is powerful. We need to all have the Spirit within us. We need to be able to pray in tongues, pray in the supernatural prayer language, because it gives us more strength against the enemy. And we can't hear the enemy when we're praying in the Spirit. So, yay. All right, today, topic of the day is forgiveness and humility can keep you healthy. And I'll say this, it's definitely kept me healthy when I've learned and adopted this as a part of my life. You know, the enemy's goal is to hurt us as much as he can, especially when we're younger, when we can't process what's really going on. You know, as we get older, we can actually defend ourselves a little bit better. But when we're children, if we get hurt, then the enemy starts to have a toehold, and he starts to speak to us in our mind and our thoughts, and it causes us to say things and do things that is not, you know, of the fruit of the Spirit. It's more of the fruit of the flesh, where we get triggered and we get angry and we get jealous, we feel betrayed, we don't trust anybody, we hear the voices of the enemy speaking to us, telling us we can't trust anybody because we've been hurt, say by our father, by our mother, by a neighbor, by a sibling that touched us sexually, all these things, the ways that the enemy hurts us. So I've been walking in this constant state of forgiving people, and there have been some people that have tried to hurt me very deeply. And I've had to forgive them and to love them every single time for whatever they say or do. And then to try to walk in humility as best that I can. And that's a challenge too, right there in itself. But when we do these things, what will happen is it takes away a major part of the enemy afflicting us with a lot of sickness and or disease. You can imagine if you have a lot of anger and bitterness for other people, that gives legal rights to the enemy and the demonic spirits and the spirits of infirmity to come upon us and to give us sickness and disease. And there's other things such as generational curses, witchcraft curses and stuff that can also affect. But we have to do our part to stay out of anger and bitterness and pride. And when we do that, that helps to lower the chances of having sickness and disease within us. You know, I've been doing this now since 2009, and it's changed my life. You know, I don't have health insurance. I don't have, you know, sickness and disease. There may be sometimes I have pains in my body, but they go away. And the Lord has healed me of everything. I haven't taken Tylenol or ibuprofen or medication or over-the-counter, even vitamins or oils. I don't take any of that stuff. It's all the Lord, all Jesus. And it's been working. It's been working amazing. And I can't tell you how great it is to be able to get out there and exercise and go for walks and see all the beauty of the Lord in mountains, in lakes, in beaches. I love adventures. I love to go to new places I've never been before, and I really love to watch sunrises and sunsets. And it's just a lot of peace and a lot of joy. And whether I'm, on the ocean or at a lake or in the mountains, I just enjoy being close to the Lord and appreciating the beauty that He has created for us. So, anyway, I wrote another blog. Again, I've been blogging every day now. It's like, those of you that know me know that I don't like to sit in one place and write. I'd rather be either talking to people, ministering to people, loving on people, going for walks. I think I think Jesus did a lot of stuff outside, much more so than He did inside the building, inside the synagogues. That's where oftentimes the Pharisees and the scribes would hide out and do their teaching. And I think Jesus loved to be out in nature, loved to be, some of the places I went to when I was in Israel, where He went to and spoke the Beatitudes. I went there and I could see where the Sea of Galilee was at. And it was like on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. And I was thinking, okay, this is the place to do it, is outside. I've done some ministry outside, and I'd much prefer to be outside than inside. But all right, here I go. So, Billy Graham once said that 75% of the people in hospitals would not be there if they would just forgive. And then I heard Kenneth Copeland say this a couple of months ago. He said that most chronic illnesses are self-induced. When other people do things to hurt us, we get our souls wounded. Our souls are our mind, which is our thoughts. That's how the enemy speaks to us, is through our thoughts. Our wills, which is our free will, and emotions, which is how we react. Do we get triggered and go off on people? Or are we going to be calm, no matter if the people do what we want or not? So I remember that growing up in the church, no one ever told me what our soul was. I think nobody knew what the soul was. But I'm like, hello, Jesus goes after our souls. He wants our souls. And Satan wants our souls, which is our mind, will, and emotions. That's really kind of who we are. We have a spirit, we live in a body, and we possess a soul. So when we are young and we get hurt emotionally, physically, or sexually, we do not know how to cope with many of the wounds and traumas, so a part of our souls gets sliced into like an alternate personality, which is comprised essentially of these demonic spirits that will torment us. So we can see this when we get older, because what will happen is if someone doesn't do what we want them to do, is we'll get triggered. We become a different person. We could become very angry for a long time. It could be 15 minutes. Oftentimes it could be an hour or longer. Sometimes it could be days. And then we go off on people and we get triggered and we become a different person. Oftentimes our eyes will get darker. Our voice will have a tone. We will become a different person, because what happens is those demonic spirits start to trigger us based upon largely what happened when we were younger. Now again, we can go through traumas as we get older, absolutely, but we can cope with it a little better as we get adults. But I know a lot of people that have gone through satanic ritual abuse or have been sex trafficked, over and over and over again, and it's horrendous. It's much more challenging for them to get delivered. Why? Because they have a lot more demonic spirits that have had legal access, legal rights through the trauma, through the abuse that they've had. So that's how it works, essentially. We go through stuff, and that's why it's interesting. I never knew. I thought, my normal was my normal. Again, your normal is your normal. So whatever we grow up as is our normal. We don't know any different. I've talked to so many different people, ministered to so many people who have gone through so horrendous lifestyles growing up, where they've been, molested sexually, some by their mom, some by their dads, some by their. I had one woman that went to her dad was in the Freemasons, and he ended up sexually molesting her along with 3 other guys from the Masonic Lodge. That's why we preach and teach about the Masons. It's evil what they do there. And that's why when we have that in our bloodline, as her father or grandfather or whatever, the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the third and the fourth generations, the iniquities. And so they make these oaths that will come down the bloodline and affect us. I was watching this weekend, the prophet, although he doesn't like to call himself a prophet, but Mark Taylor had done a documentary where he had Masonic roots up his bloodline that were affecting him. And he had to go through breaking those things off before he started to see freedom in his own life. He basically said that, it's almost impossible for any of us to not have some of that Masonic stuff in our bloodline. So we don't know what we don't know. I didn't know my grandfather was involved in it until he died. And when we were at his funeral, that these guys in aprons came and started doing their rituals, and then we all left. And I didn't know why. We didn't even talk about it. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 7 years, 10 years later, that my oldest brother said, Grandpa was a Mason. And I'm like, what? No, he wasn't. He was a farmer. Why would he be in that? Well, I now know, because there are contacts, business contacts, and money is what that's all about. And he had a lot of problems with walking, and his back and his legs were bowed, and I had scoliosis in my spine, which what happens is oftentimes anyone that's involved in the Masons is they become prideful, and this spirit of Leviathan will wrap around a person's spine and it will twist. So oftentimes it comes down the bloodline, and you're an innocent, grandson or granddaughter of someone that was involved in this, or maybe your dad, or it could be your mother. There's called the Eastern Star, which is for women, and that will affect you. And you didn't do anything, but because of the curses that they put down the bloodline, oh my gosh, it's like they're selling their soul to the devil, and they really are. It's all towards the great architect of the universe. All right, let me go back to my blog. So, the purpose of the alternate personality is to hold the emotion and pain so we can function in society. Unfortunately, when we are wounded, demons have a legal right to speak to our minds to give us thoughts because of those wounds. And they'll whisper to us in our thoughts to remind us of the injustices and to tell us that we can't trust people. And what will happen is oftentimes we'll blame God because he didn't protect us from like our father or our mother or anyone else. So it causes us to oftentimes have a hard time trusting the Lord. I remember talking to one woman who had been satanic ritually abused, and she was describing that one of the guys that did that to her dressed up looking like Jesus and then raping her. And then he said, know what, if there was a God, God would have protected you. So he was basically programming her to not trust God. And then that's what she said to me multiple times is, well, my gosh, how could God let me go through this? Well, God pretty much allows people to have free will. And yeah, she was a victim, truly, in every sense of the word. It was horrible what her dad and mom did, and then allowing others to hurt her and torture her. But you can imagine the demonic spirits that attached to her were great. And it was really, really, really hard for her to break free from those old mindsets that God really does love us. But he does give us a free will, and he gives others a free will to unfortunately come in to hurt us. All right. So the solution is for us to forgive people. Oh my gosh, there goes an eagle. Wow. A bald eagle. Bald-headed eagle. All right, so the solution is for us to forgive the people who have hurt us. But when we have deep, deep pains and traumas from our childhood, the voices of the enemy have been speaking to our minds for a long time, and they become very familiar voices to us. We believe these voices will protect us from getting hurt again because they tell us that they will. So instead, they cause us to trigger in dramatic and toxic ways on our current relationships. And then we hurt more people that we love, thinking that we are always right, because we'll end up feeling feelings of jealousy and anger and rejection and betrayal and worse. Then what happens is we end up hurting our own children. We end up infecting our own children down the bloodline. So we pass on these demonic spirits down to the next generation. And that's how oftentimes they work, is that They want us to be hurt, say, by our own father or mother, or stepfather, stepmother, or if we have sleepovers, sexual stuff by other people. And then once the demonic spirits start to speak to us in our minds, we then end up infecting our own children by being too harsh with them, by being too prideful with them. And then oftentimes they hate us. They want nothing to do with us. And then the demonic spirit's going to tell us to blame everything on our children. It's all their fault, so that we don't take any responsibility. And then the children want nothing to do with us. And then it goes down to the next generation. And then they end up getting married, and they end up striving and fighting and arguing with each other because of the wounds that they have, the demonic spirits they're listening to, and then they have children, and then they pass it on down to their children. And the demons just laugh all day long because people that go to church, in large part, aren't even taught this. And then they try to behaviorally counsel people to behave good. Say, stop being bad and be good. And it doesn't work. Why? Because we're getting up to 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. The National Science Foundation did a study in 2005, of which of those 50 or 60,000 thoughts a day, 80% of the thoughts are negative, 95% are repetitive. So if you can't turn off the demonic thoughts because they keep having a legal right to keep speaking to you, you're almost feeling like you're going crazy. And the people that you're married to oftentimes think you are crazy. And in some cases, you would probably be deemed that. But in the cases of those who have the spirit of Jezebel, you'll be very good at acting like a professional grade actor. And you'll be able to control, manipulate, and dominate people, be very prideful. And what at the core of it is you've got a lot of pains and wounds from the past that you still have unforgiveness for those who've hurt you. And you always have pride that comes in, so that will allow you not to see it in yourself and blame everybody else. And then you're basically kind of miserable to be around, to be married to. And then oftentimes it ends in a divorce, and then you end up getting very married to somebody else that you can control, and then it ends up ruining that relationship. And it goes on and on and on until you die. And oftentimes as you get older, you have less and less friends because no one wants to be around a prideful person. All right. Anytime we experience wounds from our past, our soul is wounded. And then we must work on forgiving people who have hurt us and all the injustices that we suffered. If we don't forgive everyone who hurt us, then the enemy has legal right to torment our thoughts, and we will not be at peace and will often develop sicknesses and diseases due to the anger and bitterness that develops in our hearts through our mind's thoughts. The demons often try to get us to take vengeance upon those who we have felt hurt by, and then we will become the ones who get sicker both in our minds and physically. We must forgive to free us and keep us healthy. I know I've heard this said before, where oftentimes when you've got a lot of anger and bitterness for a person that hurt you deeply, it's like you are drinking poison, hoping that it kills the person that hurt you. And instead, you're making yourself sicker and you're dying a slow death. And it's true. I've seen a lot of people that get older. They're like, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe all the things I went through. And oftentimes they recount their spouse and how bad that they felt hurt by them, or their mom or their dad or stepfather, stepmother, whoever. And they have such anger and bitterness, and they're in the hospitals and they have one sickness after the other, and they have such an anger and hatred and bitterness for that person. And it's almost impossible for them to love God or to receive the Lord truly. They may say that they're a Christian and all that, but look at the fruit of their lives and it will say otherwise. All right, Hebrews 12, 14 through 15. New King James Version says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. That's truth. Matthew 6, 14 through 15 says, for if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. 1 John 2:11, but whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. He does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded him. 1 John 3:15, whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. So remember how Saul got jealous and developed hatred and bitterness for David. And then the spirit of torment came upon him, and he wanted to murder David, over and over and over again. And so, because of that anger and bitterness for David, he got sicker and sicker emotionally in his mind. He was tormented. So I'm going to read 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 through 17. This is when Saul starts to have that root of bitterness come into him. It says, "Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore." This is after he killed Goliath. "Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it had happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry." Right now, anger came up in him. How many times have we been hurt by someone and we become very angry with them? Okay, so the saying of those women displeased him. And he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?" So Saul eyed David from that day forward. He became jealous of him. How many times does that happen? When we have been angry at someone, and then maybe there's a jealousy that develops. The green eye of jealousy. So, then it says, "And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, 'I will pin David to the wall.' But David escaped his presence twice. Now Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore, when Saul saw that he behaved very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. So Saul got worse and worse in his torment of his soul, his mind, will, and emotions, and pursued to kill David instead of giving him to the Lord and repenting and humbling himself." So I remember my good friend, Christian psychologist Dominic Herbst, talked about how the soul can, turn into a toxic, devastating place within a person, and that is when oftentimes they end up feeling either rejected or hurt. Oftentimes a person will put up a boundary between them and that person because that person still has unhealed soul wounds, and they want to control the person. They get very jealous, and then that triggers them, and they go off on the person. So then the person puts up a boundary, and then maybe they have to even separate from them to keep their peace. And then that person really gets angry, and they oftentimes want to come in and start lying about that person to other people to get them to hate on them as well. And they have a spirit of murder, and vengeance comes upon them. Well, then their soul ends up going into a devastating pit, basically, where they have all this darkness, and all these demons have legal rights to torment them. Because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. We are not to take the vengeance upon anyone. And that's exactly what happened to Saul. Ultimately, he ended up, he used to consult, other prophets like Samuel, and Samuel died. So then he wanted to consult a medium. And the medium he consulted knew that Saul was against mediums at the time. He had an edict not to have anyone consult with him. But in his case, he couldn't get any prophetic words anymore, so he went to this medium and said, I'm not going to hurt you, just give me a word. And she's like, seriously? Like, you're going to kill me. So eventually he suffered a tragic death. So 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 13 says, now the Philistines fought against Israel. And the men of Israel, and again, I'll stop it there. He tried to kill David multiple times. And actually, when I went to Israel, the only time I've ever been there was in 2009, September, October, during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I remember they stopped at the Dead Sea, and they had a place where David used to get water from this waterfall. And he used to hide out up above in this cave that was on top of this mountain where you could see, I don't know, 40 or 50 miles in every direction. And so I got to go there and see that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a great hideout, even though it was kind of scary to get up there. They didn't have any railings or anything, but they had a waterfall there. And so Saul tried to kill David several times. And remember, David had the opportunity to kill Saul, but he wouldn't do it. He's like, nope, not going to do it. He's anointed by God, and I'm not going to take him out, even though Saul was trying to take him out. So how many of us sometimes get into having relationships where you have a person that wants to, oftentimes maybe not kill you, but they sure want to harm you. They want to say as many lies about you as possible to turn people against you. What will happen in their lives is they'll oftentimes get sicker and sicker and sicker. They may become addicted to things like alcohol, drugs, because the Lord ends up, essentially, they get turned over to their debased mind, and the enemy can have at them. And it ends up causing them oftentimes to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and they may be hospitalized. They may have diseases come upon them because of the anger and hatred that they have. All right, so let me get a drink here. I'm thirsty. One thing I like about Colorado is there's no humidity, or very low humidity. So even though I think right now it's supposed to be like 90 degrees here today, right now there's a light breeze. I'm underneath a tree, a pine tree. It's very perfect conditions here. All right, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together that same day. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those who were on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled. And the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So it happened the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and amongst the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth Shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So, a tragic end because Saul was consumed with taking vengeance upon David. You know, what he should have done and what we should do if someone hurts us. And again, we have some people that hurt us and that legitimately they are in the wrong. You know, in the case of David, he did nothing wrong. You know, and then there's cases where we are angry at people that didn't do anything wrong. You know, it could be that they had their unhealed wounds that were triggering them, causing them to control and manipulate us, and then we end up separating from them. And then they're mad because we separated. It's like, well, hello, we're not going to stay around being verbally abused all day long, every day. That's nuts. You need to get help. And oftentimes the people won't get help. So all it does is cause us to have more exhaustion and or sickness in our own bodies from constant abuse verbally, and it can be physically and sexually. So Jesus used a parable to give us God's perspective about forgiveness. He described a king who forgave his servant's massive debt. It amounted to what would be millions of dollars today. But the servant turned right around and refused to forgive a fellow servant's debt of around $10. When the king heard about it, he was enraged. He sent the servant he had forgiven to the torturers in the prison. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you, Jesus explained, unless you forgive your brother from your heart. And it says from your heart. I know of a whole bunch of people that said, oh, I've said I've forgiven them, but in your heart have you done it? Which means if they were to show up right now where you were at, and they didn't ever apologize to you for what they said or did, could you go up to them and talk to them? Could you go up and even give them a hug? Or would you want to hit them or smack them or punch them because you still have anger and bitterness in your heart? If you still have anger and bitterness in your heart, guess what? You've not forgiven them. And that's why the enemy has legal right to keep tormenting you in your thoughts. And that's why you may have sickness and disease, is because of your unforgiveness. So in Jesus' story, the king freely forgave his servant, but he absorbed the cost. In the same way, God forgave us, but he absorbed the debt of our sin when Christ died on the cross in our place. Like him, we are to give forgiveness freely to the sinner, even though it is costly to us. So we must forgive because God forgave us. I know, like in my own case, I look back and I went through some really hard stuff for 6 straight years. But the Lord showed me to forgive every day along the way, to not go to bed every night with anger and hatred, even though it would have been easy to do that. And I remember he showed me from his perspective why this person was hurting me. It's because they were hurt deeply by their own parents. And so I could look at them as a hurting little girl. And I had compassion for her and love because she was tormented. She couldn't be at peace. So there's a lot of us who have been hurt by people, and they were hurt. And if you ask the Lord to show them, to show you, show me why that person did such horrible things, why they were bullies to me, why they were horrible, then guess what? You can see them through Christ's eyes. You can forgive them of anything. If Jesus could forgive all those who killed him, you know, what more easier can we be to then forgive a person for saying things that were horrible to us, or molesting us, you know, raping. I know it's horrible to go through some of these things and then go through them multiple times. Horrible, horrible, horrible evil. But if you can see that it's demons that cause these people to behave that way, then you can separate out the demons from the person and say the only reason why that person did these horrendous things to me was because they were hurt. And the Lord will oftentimes show you a little snippet or a movie of their life. Remember the movie The Shack? In The Shack, they showed why the main character was abused by his dad in the shack. It was because his own dad was abused by his grandfather. I mean, actually his father, but I mean, it was the main character's grandfather that abused his dad. And once he saw that in that little snippet of the movie, he then got it. So how many of us, if we could actually see what the Lord is wanting to show us, we could forgive anybody? You know, we have to get to that point. Say, Lord, show me. Why did my dad, why did my mom, why did my spouse do these horrendous things to me? Well, because they were hurt and they were filled with demons. Well, then that explains everything. Okay, even though they may act like a Christian, you know, that's the hardest thing, is people that struggle with the spirit of Jezebel are very great actors and actresses, and they'll act like they're so super sweet and loving and kind and godly when they're nothing like that behind closed doors. That's why the Lord looks upon the heart and the mind. You know, and that's why Matthew 7:21-23 says, Lord, Lord, look at all I've done for you. I've cast out demons in your name, prophesied in your name, done many wonders in your name. The Lord's like, depart from me. Why? Because he knows our heart. He knows we didn't do anything that was from the will of his Father. Because we still had all this anger and unforgiveness and all this demonic stuff that was coming out and manifesting in us, hurting other people. That's why it's so critical for people to get set free and delivered, get healed and delivered, having Jesus to heal them. Because otherwise, I don't like the chances of people getting to heaven. Unfortunately, because you can't keep abusing a person behind closed doors, lying about them, behaving in the fruit of the flesh, you know, having sex with other people and all this stuff. It's not godly. We got to clean ourselves up. And the only way we can do that is to humble ourselves and to forgive people and to have Jesus heal our soul wounds. And then we become a different person. So become Christ-like and have the fruit of the Spirit. All right, let me go back in here. So God views our lack of forgiveness for one another from the same perspective. His word urges us to, quote, this is Ephesians 4:31 through 32, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. So, I'm getting thirsty again. So pride, let's talk about pride now. We've talked about forgiveness. Pride comes into us whenever we are hurt. It especially is hurtful when we are younger, as we cannot process the pain. You know, that's why the enemy wants to hurt us quickly as possible from our own dad or our own mother. You know, I've heard horrendous stories where a dad or a mom said to their child, I wish I never born you. I wish you were never born. I wish I would have aborted you. I mean, horrendous, horrible things. Again, they're demons that are saying that through them. So pride causes us not to trust other people and tells us that our decisions are the best because the people who should have protected us didn't, and we don't want to be hurt again by anyone. Pride also keeps us from having good health and then getting healed, as well as can cost us our salvation. It got Lucifer kicked out of heaven because of his pride. The Lord hates pride, as he wants us to humble ourselves before him. The spirit of Leviathan is described in the Bible as the spirit causing us to be prideful. It's in Job 41. Verse 33-34 says, on earth there is nothing like him, which is Leviathan, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing, which is prideful thing. He is king over all the children of pride. And then Proverbs 6:16-17 says, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look. Well, that was weird. A butterfly, a monarch, just went flying right by my ear. A proud look. So he hates a proud look. He hates pride. Hates it, it says. It's an abomination to him. It goes on and talks about a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, you know, feet that rush into evil, spreading lies and rumors. James 4:6 says, but he gives more grace. Therefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. James 4:10, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Proverbs 29:23, a man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. And that's what I see is going on in the church today, and beyond the church. But in the church, there's a lot of people who have not got their soul wounds healed yet, and they're operating out of the pain, and they're very prideful, and they're in leadership, and the Lord is humbling a lot of them, exposing a lot of them, and then he's going to promote those who have his humble heart. So it's time to get right and get righteous with the Lord. So pride also can keep you from your healing. God always wants to heal, but oftentimes has to wait until we humble ourselves first, as we have an incentive then to lose the pride and to gain the healing and to gain our salvation in many cases. Consider the story of Naaman and his leprosy. 2 Kings 5:1-19. It says, now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, so he's a high up dude, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy. And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Then he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which said, "Now be advised when this letter comes to you that I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy." And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter that he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me," which is like strife and an argument. So it was when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." Then Naaman went with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean." So, I've been to the Jordan River. I've been baptized there, and it is a dirty river. There are rats that are in the river. It is what it is. So, Naaman became furious and went away and said, "Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy." So he's got pride. And how many of us, and I've seen this in ministry when I've ministered, where a person wanted me to do a personal session with them, and they had pride. And they actually were in a deliverance ministry, but they had a lot of pride. And they wanted it on their terms. And I told them to come to the meeting that I was going to do. It was going to be a corporate meeting. And they would end up, hearing the message. The Lord would speak to them. And then it's between them and the Lord getting healed. And they showed up late for the meeting. Like, it was a Sunday morning church service. And it was 30 minutes late. So they missed a huge portion of what they needed to hear, including the humbling part. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't get this. If I were in pain physically, I would do whatever to try to receive the healing. And if it was on my part, I would try to humble myself if I had the pride, and do whatever it took. But in this case, the person didn't do that. They refused to show up on time, and then they wanted a personal session afterwards. Oh, it didn't work. And I'm like, seriously? I'm like, and that's exactly what's happening here with Naaman. He wants a person that's a prophet of the Lord to just wave their hand and say, "You're healed," and do it the easy way. And there's a lot of us that want it the easy way instead of doing what we need to do, taking out the equation of forgiveness, unforgiveness, and pride. We don't want to humble ourselves. Well, the demonic spirits are telling us in our minds, to do it a certain way. And if the person doesn't do it that way, then okay, it's their problem, not ours. And they'll blame the person, the man of God or the woman of God, instead of taking responsibility for themselves. Because it's much easier to off it on someone else than it is to own it. If we don't own our own issues, then our issues get to own us, and the demonic spirits have legal right to keep tormenting us. Okay, so then it says, "Are not the Abna and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. That's what prideful people do. They rage. They want it their way. Why? Because that's what the demons are telling them. Don't let them tell you what to do. You tell them what to do. Well, if you're the one that's got sickness and pain in your body, I would make sure that I would take pride out of the equation as quickly as I possibly could. All right, and the servants came near and spoke to him. So his servants, so you may have some people that might speak to you, and if it's of the Lord, then listen. He says, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So, what happened? Naaman listened, and he humbled himself. He humbled himself. So he says he went down and he dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And then his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his aides, and came and stood before him, and he said, Indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now therefore, please take a gift from your servant. But he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive nothing. That's Elisha saying that. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So Naaman said, Then if not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. Yet in this thing may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. Then he said to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a short distance. So, the crux of this whole story is, if you're dealing with pain or sickness, whether physical or emotional, or it could be sexual, always make sure to do your part through forgiving everyone who has hurt you in your past or present and future, because you're going to get hurt. You're going to have offenses that are going to come to you. It's whether or not you choose to take the offenses and get mad and angry. You know, all day long we'll have people that are going to say lies and try to come against and twist and make you look bad. You got to forgive them. You got to give them to the Lord. Let the Lord deal with them. Do not take it in your own hands and say, vengeance is mine, because now you're going to end up putting a curse on yourself and having anger and bitterness come upon you. And the enemy can then give you sickness and disease and death. So we want to take out of the equation everything that we can of ourselves. So we got to forgive people. And again, if you have a challenge doing that, then ask Jesus to come and to give you a word about your person that hurt you, your dad, your mom, your stepfather, your stepmother, people that raped you, or a sister or brother, all these things. Ask Jesus to come to give you a word to heal it. And then, once you hear what you hear from Jesus, then command the demonic spirits to go that attach to those wounds. Command them to go to the pit in Jesus' name. And you'll feel so much lighter, so much more peace. It's amazing how much freedom. I remember when I listened to churches when I was growing up and they talked about forgiveness, I didn't understand it. Well, now I understand it. The enemy's job is to try to hurt us and to take advantage of us as much as possible and to cause us to have so much pain and then anger for that person. And then if we never, ever forgive them truly in our hearts, we're the ones that are going to get sicker. We're the ones that are going to be angry and have bitterness. And we're the ones that could be in the hospital and die earlier than God had planned and wanted us to. So ask the Lord to show you if you have any unforgiveness or pride, and then repent for it. Ask the Lord to show you from His perspective why the people in your life hurt you, and you will see that they were hurt. They were operating in evil due to the demonic spirits tormenting them because somebody hurt them. Then you can have grace to forgive them. There can be other components of healing, such as breaking off generational curses, witchcraft curses, but you have to at least do your own part when it comes to forgiveness and humility, first and foremost. Again, when I learned about this back in 2009, it was incredible because I learned by my mentor not to speak into the circumstances about anything that I was currently going through to him or to anyone, just to endure what I was going through and to trust the Lord and then forgive and have a forgiving heart no matter what this person did to me, over and over and over and over and over again for 6 years, to forgive and to forgive and forgive and to see them from Christ's perspective. And then I could do it. And then even, later, some more, abuse and lies and stuff and having to deal with that. But I had to forgive and forgive and forgive. And once I could see the person from Christ's perspective, then I could understand, okay, they're tormented by these demonic spirits, and that's why they're saying what they're saying. They're not being honest. And I give them to the Lord. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And then the Lord looks at your heart. He knows what's truth and what's not. It doesn't matter what other people say or think or believe. What matters is what God knows about you. And He does want to bless you. He wants to bless you with, peace and good health. You know, again, I've been walking in this divine health since 2009. I've not taken ibuprofen, Tylenol, medication, over the counter, even vitamins, oils, nothing. It's God. That's where my faith is at, is that Lord is my protection and my provider of my health. I haven't spent anything on health care, no insurance that I paid for since 2012 now, since I came out of the corporate world. So it's been 8 years. You know, I used to have a budget that was pretty high with when I was married and had kids for healthcare. And now I don't worry about it because I've taken that out of the equation. And so how many of us need to say, okay, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to mean it with my heart. I'm going to forgive right now everyone that hurt me. And then, man, you get so freed. You feel so much better. It's like there's a weight that gets lifted off your shoulders. You feel so much lighter. And then you just ask the Lord, you know, if I have any pride in me, you know, give me humility. I want that gone. Humble ourselves, you know, repentance. Repentance is a lost topic in the church. And there's a lot of churches that are a mess today because the pastors have neglected focusing on getting people's wounds healed and then going through deliverance. And all it is you have to be honest. Jesus knows, the Lord knows if we have any anger and unforgiveness and pride. And then we have to forgive people. And then we have to humble ourselves in the pride and repent. And so when we do our own part, then the Lord will do his part. And he will provide the healing. You know, again, I'm not God. I don't know how it all works out, but I just know how it's worked for me and worked for others. So, alrighty. Well, I will let you guys go and have a great rest of your Monday. What is this? June 15th. So we're halfway through the month of June. And just pray blessings upon everyone and joy and childlike innocence, and that the Lord will give you revelation of this truth, because it is true. And I don't know why, you know, I guess I do know why the church doesn't want to speak about this, because it's truly life-changing. It's truly getting people to have peace in their minds and in their hearts. And the demonic spirits don't want that to happen, so they're going to fight against this more than anything. So it's one thing when you're a pastor and you're teaching, you should behave this way. You should have the fruit of the Spirit. You should have this, you should have that, but they don't give you tactics of how to do it. Then it's like, well, how do I do this? Oh my gosh, it's not working. We're fighting, striving, arguing all the time in our relationship with my spouse and my children. Well, just behave that way. Well, it's like, it's impossible. I'm getting 50,000 thoughts a day from the enemy telling me to be selfish and to not listen to anybody else, and that your way's right and everybody else is wrong and blah, blah, blah. So, alrighty. Well, I will see you guys on Facebook, and we'll talk to you later. Again, this won't be on YouTube for probably another week, unless I can remember how to convert it. So Tina is my expert on that. So she's taking a vacation this week. Yay, well deserved. So, all right, we'll see you later. Love ya. Bye-bye.